Surely we have to learn that we can't keep, as Canadians, we can't keep making the trade of freedoms for the promise of security, that freedoms need to prevail. And it may mean that you give up a little possible security. It may mean you give up a little bit of right to enjoyment of property. But that's a trade that we have to stop making.
David Menzies for Rebel News here in Ottawa. And what can I tell you, folks? Day 44, that's right, day 44 of the Tamara Lich, Chris Barber mischief trial just wrapped of a mischief trial. And just think about that. Mischief. You know, mischief is usually something like, a kid spray painting the wall of a building. The idea that this is a trial that would go on for 44 days, let alone 4 hours, it's utterly preposterous. We have seen in the past 10 months in the streets of our great Dominion the pro-Hamas thugs going out and openly chanting for genocide. And what is the reaction? Well, the police do nothing. Actually, that's not quite true. In the case of the Toronto Police Service, they bring the members of the Hitler Youth Movement coffee and Timbits. You know, you want to keep them hydrated and well fed. Also, let's go back to the Black Lives Matter protests. Justin Trudeau himself took part in those demonstrations. He actually took a knee against the Prime Minister, which he is, I suppose, whatever. But when it comes to Tamara Lich and Chris Barber and everybody else that was part of the Freedom Convoy, these are Canadians with so-called unacceptable views, and they must be punished. We don't know how the judge is going to rule, but even if it's a not guilty verdict, given the time spent on this, and by the way, millions and millions of taxpayer dollars, the process is the penalty, wouldn't you say? It's not over yet. We're going to be back here on Friday the 13th, if you can imagine. The Crown has oral submissions to make. But in the meantime, I've got an exclusive interview arranged with Tamara Lich's lawyer, Lawrence Greenspan. He's just doing a scrum right now with the other members of the media. Let's hear what Mr. Greenspan has to say about the last several hours that just took place in this courtroom behind me.
Told where to go, how to get there, and where to park. And they did that. There's no other case out of the 100 cases that the judge had before her where that's been the situation, where the authorities have told them, go over there, park there. And that's the one thing. And the other thing, of course, is that there's Justice McLean's orders in which he specifically preserved their right to continue to peacefully assemble. And he did that in the middle of this demonstration. So those two things are not anywhere found in any of the previous case law, and that's why I suspect the judge has indicated right at the end that this is an unprecedented situation.
And my last question, at the very end you suggest that this is like, as Benjamin Franklin said, people who sacrifice liberty for security. And we might end up apologizing if these two are convicted. Is that how you feel about that?
It's a trade-off, unfortunately, that Canadians have been, historically, we've been prepared to trade freedoms for security. We've done it over and over and over again. We did it to the Italian Canadians. We did it to the Japanese Canadians. We did it to those who were arrested without any rights in the War Measures Act in 1970. We've done it over and over again. And every time we wait a generation or two, and then we apologize to those people. So my hope is that we won't be apologizing for anything in this circumstance. Perhaps we can apologize to the people whose bank accounts were frozen. Perhaps we can apologize to the people who were arrested under an Emergency Measures Act that should never have been invoked.
Thank you, Mr. Greenspan.
Thank you.
What do you make of the length of this trial? I'm under the understanding that mischief, that's typically something like, a kid spray painting the side of a building and a judge going, now listen, young man, I never want to see you back here. It should take 4 minutes, not 44 days. What is your take?
Well, I think that there are some people that have looked into it and will be proposing to the Guinness World Book of Records this be the longest mischief trial in jurisprudential history. It's as I mentioned in there, the only thing that's overwhelming in this case is the amount of resources that have been thrown at a case which is a mischief, particularly in light of the fact that there are far more serious offenses in this very building that are being dismissed for unreasonable delay.
Even the judge herself said this is an unprecedented case. And when it comes to resources, what do you think has been the cost of the taxpayer tab? I mean, how many millions, can I say millions, has gone into this?
I have no idea. I've got to believe it's millions, but that's not something that we're privy to.
Okay then. Now, Mr. Greenspan, for those who were not in the court today to observe the proceedings, can you summarize maybe your top 3 or 4 points in terms of what you were saying to the judge?
This case is, as the judge described it, unprecedented for 2 essential reasons. The first is that in no other case in Canada, certainly no case that the judge was provided with out of the 100 cases that she's being asked to review, in no other case was it a situation where the demonstrators were invited in by the authorities, directed in to where they should go, told where they should park, and then prosecuted because that's where they went. That's just not. It's not something that we've ever experienced. If you look at all of the protest cases, it's never a case of the police saying, you know what, go over there, and then they turn around and say, look, because you went over there, we're going to prosecute you. So that's the first element. The second element is we have the benefit of not 1 but 2 orders from a Superior Court judge in which he specifically recognized the right of the demonstrators to peacefully assemble, and their right to do so, and he's explicitly in his orders said they remain and have the continuing right to peacefully demonstrate in our city. Again, there's no protest case or otherwise where in the middle of the case you have a judge saying, good housekeeping, seal of approval, you can keep doing what you're doing as long as you're doing it peacefully and safely and lawfully. And that's what makes this case very different from any other that has been put before Her Honor.
And Mr. Greenspan, I found it fascinating. At one point you were referencing what we've seen in so many universities across Canada, these pro-Hamas encampments, and yet we do see, I mean, I've observed it several times myself, coded calls for genocide, vandalism, violence, whatnot. Mm-hmm. And I guess what I'm getting at is that there is a great concern amongst many people about what they would call two-tier policing and a double standard political system. In other words, these actions, which many would say were far, far more egregious than anything that happened in this city in 2022, it's going by the wayside. In fact, in Toronto, you even had cops delivering coffee and Timbits to demonstrators, whereas there seems to be a disproportionate amount of resources going after Tamara Lich and Chris Barber. Your thoughts?
Well, a steak dinner to anybody who can repeat your question, David. We'll start with that. Look, this is a situation where the constant message from Barber and Lich was keep it peaceful, cooperate with the police. If you see somebody who's not cooperating, let us know, or you tell the police. The police got along famously for 3 weeks with the demonstrators. One thing that became clear, and that I emphasized again today, is that there was not a parking ticket, there was not a trespass notice, there was not a noise bylaw violation. Not one was served on any of the protesters during the 3 weeks that they were there. And now the Crown turns around and says, oh, it was unlawful what they did? Well, I don't think so.
Here's a hypothetical question for you, Mr. Greenspan. Do you think if the politics of this protest were different, in other words, if this was about an Indigenous matter, if this was Black Lives Matter, because we saw years ago Justin Trudeau himself took part in those kind of demonstrations with Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. He even bent a knee, which was kind of funny because he is the prime minister, so is he bending the knee against himself? It's beyond my pay grade. But is that what it comes down to? There are certain, I guess, state-approved protests, and then there are those protests, well, it's the unacceptable fringe minority.
Well, I think this was a case where here you had in the nation's capital an incredibly successful, by all accounts, non-violent protest by a group of people who were suffering. And there's no question they were suffering as a result of the mandates, the COVID mandates that were brought into place. When the individuals, the demonstrators, came to Ottawa by the thousands, they did overwhelm the city. There's no question that there was interference with private property rights, enjoyment of property. But when you look at their democratic right to say no, we need these mandates changed, that should carry the day. And that really is the essence of the argument, that in a contest between fundamental freedoms in our Constitution, peaceful assembly, right to freedom of expression, those things should, excuse the expression, trump every time. They should trump every time there is an issue of enjoyment of property, a right to enjoyment of property.
And Mr. Solomon, we're not quite out of the woods yet. The Crown needs about a half day for their oral submissions. We're back here ominously, if you're superstitious, on Friday the 13th of September. Any idea what the Crown might say to contradict the arguments you made today in court?
I can't imagine that they're going to have any arguments which aren't already contained in their 140 pages of written submissions or their 106 slides of amplification. But let's stay tuned. Let's see what they have to say. We've done it historically over and over and over again, sadly. And then what's happened every time is the next generation or two generations later, we've had to apologize. So we've apologized to the Japanese Canadians, who we interned as a matter of safety, as a matter of security. We've apologized to the Italian Canadians. We've even apologized to the people who were arrested and held without rights as a result of the 1970 War Measures Act imposition by Justin's dad. We've apologized to all those generations. Surely we have to learn that we can't keep, as Canadians, we can't keep making the trade of freedoms for the promise of security, that freedoms need to prevail. And it may mean that you give up a little possible security. It may mean you give up a little bit of right to enjoyment of property. But that's a trade that we have to stop making.
Thanks for your time, sir.
You're welcome.
You know, it's an unfair fight, isn't it? Tamara Lich, Métis grandmother, going up against, well, the government with unlimited resources. Do you want to help Tamara Lich out, folks, with this trial? Please go to helptamara.com. That's helptamara.com. And if you're able to, kindly make a donation.